They said the devil spoke through her. But no one asked why he chose her. The story of Clara Germana has been retold for more than a century, but every retelling begins in the same place, the darkness of her loneliness, long before the shadows ever answered her back. And if you listen closely, beneath the chilling details that would later terrify an entire mission school, you can still hear the soft cry of a girl who simply wanted to feel seen. This chapter does not begin with possession. It begins with a fragile, aching desire to belong. Clara Germana was 16 in the winter of 1882, a thin, delicate girl with a face that always seemed half lost in thought. She lived at St. Michael's Mission in Umzinto, a small settlement tucked into the lush, untamed lands of colonial South Africa. The mission was an uneasy mix of peace and discipline, green hills surrounding whitewashed buildings where the sisters tried to teach obedience in a world that was anything but predictable. Clara had been left at the mission as an infant. No mother ever returned, no family ever wrote. She grew up hearing stories about other children finding homes, receiving letters, or having memories of someone who once loved them. She had none. The only world she knew was the orderly, stone-walled universe of St. Michael's, and even that world often made her feel like a guest waiting for someone to ask her to leave. But Clara was gentle. There was softness in her voice, something fragile in her eyes. She spent her days studying, sewing, practicing hymns and praying, always praying. The sisters believed she had a rare devotion, a natural attraction to the divine, but the truth was simpler and far more painful. Clara prayed because she had no one else to talk to. Every night, long after the candles had burned to stubs and the whole fell silent, she knelt at the foot of her bed, hands clasped tightly, whispering her fears into the darkness. She prayed for a family. She prayed for answers. She prayed to understand why she had been abandoned. Her prayers were not elegant. They were the trembling questions of a child who had grown up waiting for something that never came. Her closest companion was Sister Maria, a young nun barely in her 20s, who had joined the mission only 3 years earlier. Maria was known among the girls as the warm one, the sister who smiled softly, who listened instead of scolding, who carried her kindness like a lantern in her hands. She saw something special in Clara, something tender, something that reminded her of herself before the world hardened her faith into duty. Maria often found Clara alone, sitting beside the garden wall, reading beneath the jacaranda tree, or staring out the window during evening storms. She would sit beside her without speaking, letting the silence settle like a blanket between them. "You pray so much, Clara," Maria once said with a sad smile. Clara hesitated, then whispered, "I pray so I don't feel alone." Maria never forgot that answer. As winter settled over the mission, the nights grew colder, the wind harsher. Chimneys breathed smoke into the sky. Windows rattled like bones. And in those nights, Clara's prayers grew more desperate. She prayed for warmth, for love, for anything that could silence the emptiness in her heart. And then, one night, something answered. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Clara woke from sleep with a jolt, her breath fogging in the freezing air. She sat up slowly, straining her ears. A strange feeling washed over her, like she wasn't alone in the room. She touched her chest, steadying her heartbeat. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, softer than a sigh. At first, she thought she imagined it, but the whisper came again, her name, Clara. It wasn't loud, it wasn't threatening. In fact, it sounded gentle, almost comforting. She froze, eyes wide, searching the darkness around her. Nothing moved. The moonlight filtered through the small window, illuminating only the foot of her bed. "Clara." The voice murmured again. Fear rushed up her spine, but it was strangled by something stronger, curiosity. For 16 years she had prayed for a voice, any voice to speak back to her. And now, in this silent, frozen room, something finally had. The next morning, Clara told no one, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she didn't know how to explain it without sounding foolish or ungrateful or mad. She walked through the day in a daze, clutching her schoolbooks, drifting through lessons, barely responding when spoken to. But Sister Maria noticed. "Are you unwell?" she asked gently during the afternoon choir practice. Clara shook her head too quickly. "Just tired." Maria studied her a moment longer, but she didn't push. She knew Clara carried her burdens like glass. Hold too tightly, and she would shatter. Hold too loosely, and she would fall apart. That At night, Clara knelt at her bedside again. She whispered her prayers with trembling lips, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, and halfway through her prayer the voice returned. This time it was closer. "Clara." She flinched, her breath catching. "Who's there?" She whispered. No answer, only a long, slow sigh, like someone breathing beside her. Clara scrambled into bed, pulling her blanket to her chin, staring into the darkness until sleep finally dragged her under. For days, the same strange occurrences continued. Whispered sounds, soft rustling. A sensation of being watched. It never happened around others. Only when Clara was alone. Only when her thoughts were the loudest. Fear grew inside her, but another feeling grew with it. A twisted sense of comfort. For the first time in her life, the silence wasn't empty. Someone was there. But loneliness can make the mind betray you. Clara wanted love so badly, she ignored the warning signs that others would have run from. One evening, while Maria was tending to sick children at the infirmary, Clara sat alone in the chapel. The moonlight streamed through stained glass windows, bathing the floor in jewel-colored shadows. She knelt, clasping her hands tightly, trying to focus on her prayer. But her thoughts were restless. She felt watched again, but this time the feeling was stronger, overwhelming. Her throat tightened. "Why are you following me?" she whispered. The chapel remained silent. She exhaled shakily and began to rise. But just as she reached for the bench, she heard it again, her name, spoken in a whisper that crawled across the back of her neck. She spun around. There was no one. The next morning, her behavior began to shift. Clara seemed distracted, pale, her eyes shadowed by dark circles. She flinched at sudden noises and avoided mirrors. She paused in the middle of conversations, as if listening to something only she could hear. Maria approached her again. "Clara, please talk to me." "Something is wrong." Clara opened her mouth to speak, but a sudden terror flashed across her face and she shook her head. "I can't," she whispered. "You won't understand." Maria gently touched her arm. "Let me try." For a moment, Clara leaned into her, wanting so badly to share the truth. Then the whisper came again, so close she felt breath against her ear. "Don't tell her." Clara jerked back violently. "I can't," she cried, her voice cracking. She fled down the hall, tears burning her eyes. Maria stood frozen, watching the girl she cared for unravel before her. Over the next week, the whispering grew bolder. Clara's nights became torment. She barely slept. She tossed and turned, drenched in cold sweat. Her heart racing, she often woke screaming, clutching at her sheets, certain someone had stood over her. But the most frightening change was her voice. One morning during breakfast, Clara suddenly went still. Her spoon clattered to the table, her head tilted, her eyes unfocused. Then she began murmuring under her breath. It was fast, rhythmic, like reciting a prayer, only it wasn't a prayer. It was Latin, fluent, flawless Latin. The sisters dropped their utensils. A few crossed themselves. Clara had never studied the language. No one knew how to react. When they asked her what she was saying, Clara stared at them blankly, as if she had no memory of speaking at all. Word began to spread around the mission. Some believed she was sleep deprived. Others whispered about spiritual affliction. But the children were the most afraid. They avoided her in the hallways, too scared to make eye contact. Only Maria remained by her side. One afternoon, Maria found Clara sitting on the stone steps behind the chapel, staring at the ground. Her hands shook in her lap. "It won't stop," Clara whispered before Maria could speak. Maria knelt beside her. "What won't stop?" Clara's voice dropped to a fragile hush. The voice, it knows things, it tells me things. I don't want to listen, but I can't shut it out. Maria's heart broke. "Clara, you're stronger than you think." "You're not alone." Clara shook her head violently. "No, I am alone. I've always been alone. And this thing, this voice, it tells me it understands me. It tells me I belong to it." Maria froze. "Belong to it?" "Clara, listen to me. Whatever this is, it's not here to help you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't know how to make it stop." Maria took her trembling hands. "You don't have to do it alone." But the whisper was already there, hovering, waiting, listening. That night, something happened that changed everything. Shortly after midnight, the mission was awakened by a sharp, guttural scream. The sound tore through the corridors like a blade. Lights flickered on. Doors slammed open. The sisters rushed toward the source, the dormitory. There, standing in the center of the room, was Clara. Her body was rigid. Her eyes were open but rolled upward, showing only white. Her chest heaved with unnatural breaths. The temperature dropped instantly, as if winter had pushed its way into the room. The candle flames bent sideways, though there was no wind. The other girls cowered in their beds, sobbing. Terrified, Clara opened her mouth, and a sound emerged that did not belong to a 16-year-old girl, a deep, layered moan, ancient, broken, echoing through the wooden walls of the dormitory. The sisters froze in horror. Clara's voice had changed. Something inside her had awoken. Sister Maria rushed forward, calling her name. She grabbed Clara's shoulders and shook her gently. "Clara, Clara, look at me." For a moment, Clara's face softened, her eyes lowered, her breathing steadied. "Maria," she whispered in her real voice, "help me." But before Maria could respond, Clara's body snapped backward, her limbs contorting in unnatural angles. A shrill scream tore from her throat, shaking dust from the rafters, and in that instant, every person in the room understood. This was no longer something that could be explained by fear, or exhaustion, or loneliness. Something darker had seeped into Clara's soul, and the girl who prayed in the dark was no longer praying alone. The scream that shattered the quiet of St. Michael's Mission did not fade quickly. It lingered in the corridors like a wound ripped open, echoing through the rafters long after Clara's body collapsed into Sister Maria's arms. For hours, the sisters whispered prayers under their breath. Some cried, others stood frozen in fear, replaying the unnatural sound that came from the girl they had raised like their own. But no one, not even the oldest, most pious nun, had any real explanation. Clara remained unconscious until dawn. Her breathing was shallow, irregular, as though she were trapped somewhere between sleep and suffocation. Maria sat beside her the entire night, refusing food, refusing rest, brushing Clara's hair away from her clammy forehead, whispering desperate prayers that felt more like pleas for mercy. But when Clara finally woke, she didn't speak. She didn't even recognize the room. Her eyes flicked to the corners as if expecting someone or something to be waiting there. Maria reached for her hand, but Clara jerked back as though burned by an unseen flame. "Clara," Maria whispered softly, "you're safe now." Clara shook her head slowly, mechanically. Then she murmured, "No one is safe." Those words chilled Maria more than the scream had. Over the next few days, the mission tried to return to routine, but nothing felt normal. The children walked quietly, glancing nervously at Clara during meals. Some slept with rosaries under their pillows. The sisters whispered among themselves when they thought no one was listening. Even the livestock behaved strangely. Restless horses, barking dogs, chickens refusing to roost. The air around the mission felt tense, charged, as if a storm hovered above waiting to break. Clara grew distant. She rarely spoke. She barely ate. Her eyes stayed fixed on the shadows as if watching invisible figures move through them. She kept her hands clasped tightly, nails digging into her palms until they bled. When Maria asked her what frightened her, Clara whispered, "It's louder now." Maria swallowed hard. "What is louder?" The voice. Maria felt her stomach twist. She had suspected it, but hearing Clara admit it changed everything. "What does it say?" Maria asked. Clara looked up slowly, her face ghostly pale. "It says it belongs to me." "And I belong to it." Maria trembled. "Clara, no, you don't belong to anything evil. You're God's child." Clara closed her eyes, tears sliding quietly down her cheeks. "It laughs when you say that." Maria pulled her into her arms, holding her tightly, but Clara's body was rigid, tense, as though suppressing something boiling inside her. Maria whispered, "You're not alone." But truth was, they were both beginning to feel like they were fighting something invisible and growing stronger every day. It was Father Erasmus who finally insisted on examining Clara. He was a tall, gray-bearded man in his 60s, known for his steady composure and unwavering faith. But when he entered Clara's room, even he felt something in the air shift, an unnatural coldness that prickled his skin. Clara sat on the bed, staring at the floor. She didn't look up when he spoke. "Clara," the priest said firmly, "I'm here to help you." She stayed motionless. He sat beside her. "Sister Maria tells me you've been hearing things, voices. Is that true?" Clara's lips moved, but no sound came out. "Child," he urged gently, "I cannot help if you do not speak." Suddenly, Clara lifted her head. Her eyes, normally soft hazel, were dark, hollow, empty. "You can't help," she whispered, "because you're afraid." Father Erasmus stiffened. No one had ever spoken to him that way. Not in that tone, not with that strange, piercing certainty. "I'm not afraid," he replied. Clara tilted her head. "The night you were ordained, the doubt you felt. I felt it with you." A wave of shock washed over him. His ordination doubts were private, buried in his heart for decades. He had never spoken about them aloud. Clara's lips curled into a small, unnatural smile. "You fear failing God. You fear you never deserved his call." Father Erasmus stepped back, breath shallow. "Clara, how could you?" Her smile vanished, replaced by something cold. "Because he knows. And he tells me everything." The priest shivered. The room suddenly felt smaller, darker, suffocating. He made the sign of the cross. Clara laughed, a low, guttural sound that did not belong to a 16-year-old girl. Maria rushed into the room at the sound. "Father, what happened?" Erasmus only shook his head. I need time to consider what we're dealing with." But he already knew. Something far beyond human understanding had taken hold of Clara. In the following nights, the mission slid deeper into fear. The whispers Clara heard became more frequent, more coherent. She spoke back to them, sometimes pleading, sometimes arguing, sometimes begging them to stop. The girls in her dormitory complained of voices during the night. Sounds like scratching beneath the floorboards, shadows moving when no light was present. One child insisted she saw Clara standing beside her bed in the middle of night, staring silently with her hair hanging over her face, but Clara had no memory of leaving her bed, or so she claimed. The sisters' concern turned to terror when Clara began speaking languages she did not know: Latin, Polish, Arabic, and an ancient dialect none of the missionaries recognized. She quoted scriptures backward, recited sins of the sisters that had long been confessed and forgiven, and predicted things that happened days later. She once walked past the chapel door and said softly, "Father Erasmus will drop the chalice today." Hours later, during afternoon mass, he did. Whispers were no longer confined to Clara's mind. They were bleeding into the walls of the mission. One evening, Maria found Clara sitting on the chapel floor, her knees drawn to her chest. She looked lifeless, drained. "Clara," Maria whispered, kneeling beside her, "talk to me. Please." Clara didn't look up. "I'm tired." Maria touched her hand of the voice. Clara shook her head slowly, of fighting it. Tears filled Maria's eyes. "But you can't give up." Clara finally lifted her gaze. Her expression was hollow. "Maria, it gives me what no one else ever did." Maria's heart lurched. "What do you mean?" "It talks to me. It listens. It stays." Her voice cracked. "I don't feel alone when it's there." Maria grabbed her shoulders. "No. Clara, it isn't staying to comfort you. It's staying to destroy you." Clara whispered, "It doesn't feel that way." Maria's voice trembled with desperation. "Because it's lying to you." Clara flinched at the word lying, as if the voice itself reacted inside her. The chapel door suddenly slammed shut with a violent force that echoed through the entire building. Candles extinguished instantly. Cold wind swept across the floor. Maria gasped and clutched Clara, whose body stiffened as though electrified. From the darkness, Clara whispered, voice overlapping with another, "You shouldn't have said that." Maria's blood froze. Word reached the diocese in a matter of days. Reports of Clara's condition, her unnatural knowledge, her violent outbursts, her speaking in tongues. Strange phenomena around her spread quickly among the priests. Some dismissed it as hysteria. Others believed it was a test of faith, but the oldest among them recognized the signs. The mission awaited direction, but they didn't need to wait long. One stormy night, Clara's condition took a terrifying turn. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder rolled across the hills. The sisters were preparing for bed when they heard a deafening crash from the chapel. Maria rushed there first. She froze in the doorway. Clara stood on the altar, arms stretched outward, head thrown back, hair soaked from the rain blowing through the shattered window. Her nightgown clung to her small frame, trembling violently as she inhaled sharp, shuddering breaths. "Clara!" Maria shouted. "Get down from there!" Clara's eyes snapped open. They were not Clara's eyes. Her voice thundered across the chapel, layered and monstrous. "She is mine!" The crucifix behind her shook violently, as though ripped by invisible hands. Candles toppled. The air cracked with something like electricity. Maria staggered back, horrified. Clara's body jerked forward, and she collapsed to her knees on the altar, sobbing hysterically. "Maria, help, please!" She cried, voice breaking as if drowning inside her own body. Maria sprinted to her, grabbing her tightly. "I'm here, Clara, I'm here." But the moment she touched her, Clara screamed and recoiled, as if Maria's hands were burning her through her nightgown. "What's happening?" Maria cried. Clara gasped. "He's angry. He doesn't want you near me." Maria felt cold from the inside out. "Then he will have to go through me." Clara opened her mouth as though to warn her, but instead a violent force threw her backward across the altar, slamming her against the far wall. Maria screamed. At that very moment, Father Erasmus arrived, drenched from the storm, and witnessed everything. His face went white. "It's time," he whispered. "We must request the church's permission." "For what?" Maria asked, her voice trembling. He looked at Clara's trembling body, curled on the cold stone floor, whispering things no human should whisper. "For an exorcism." Permission took 2 days to arrive, 2 days during which Clara's condition deteriorated rapidly. She stopped eating. She scratched her arms until they bled. She tore her sheets apart with her teeth. She spoke with voices that shook the rafters. At times, she sat perfectly still for hours, staring at nothing. At other times, she convulsed violently, screaming at things unseen. But the worst moments were her brief flashes of clarity. In those rare minutes, Clara would look at Maria with soft, terrified eyes and whisper, "I'm still here. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." And Maria never did, not for a moment. By the time the church granted approval for the exorcism, the once bright mission had sunk into despair. The sisters prayed constantly. Children refused to sleep without lights. Even the animals behaved strangely, refusing to enter the barn or grazing lands near Clara's window. Everyone knew what was coming. The whispers had not only answered back, they had begun to speak through her. Now the true battle for Clara's soul was about to begin. They would later say that the sun rose strangely on the morning of Clara's final battle, soft, pale, hesitant, as if even daylight feared stepping into the convent where darkness had made its home. The sky over Natal looked washed out, colorless, and for the first time in weeks, the air did not feel heavy. It felt expectant, as though something watched from above, waiting to see what would become of the young girl who had once prayed so softly in the dark. Inside the cramped dormitory room, Clara sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, nails digging into her palms. Her breathing was quiet, almost peaceful, but those who knew her best recognized that peace had never been so deceptive. Sister Maria knelt a few feet away, clutching her rosary so tightly the beads left deep impressions in her skin. Father Erasmus stood behind her, whispering prayers under his breath, not as an exorcist, not as a priest, but as a man afraid of failing someone he had once considered a miracle in progress. Clara lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were half-lidded, exhausted, but alert in an unnatural, unsettling way. Like a predator forced to wake moments before killing time. "You came back," she whispered, but the voice wasn't hers. The voice was layered hers beneath. Something older, colder, infinitely cruel. Sister Maria's breath stuck in her throat. Father Erasmus stiffened. The presence that had tormented Clara for months did not roar now, did not curse or mock or shriek. Its calmness was more terrifying than its rage. "You should have stayed away." The voice continued. "You almost made it out, almost." Clara's head tilted to the side, as though she were listening to someone only she could hear. Her lips curved faintly, but the voice murmured, "She keeps pulling, keeps begging, keeps wanting her life back. Pathetic." Sister Maria swallowed hard. "Clara," she whispered softly, "I'm right here. We're going to help you. Just hold on, please. Just hold on." For a moment, just a flicker, Clara's real eyes surfaced. They glistened. They pleaded. She looked like a girl on the verge of reaching up through a thick layer of water, fingertips breaking the surface before the weight dragged her back down. But then her muscles tightened, her shoulders snapped rigid, and her expression went blank. A low vibration trembled through the floorboards. Father Erasmus opened his Bible, his hands shaking despite decades of training and faith. "Lord, grant us strength," he said under his breath. "Today we finish this." Clara's head jerked backward violently, hitting the wall with a thud that echoed through the narrow room, but she didn't wince. She didn't react. Instead, she smiled. A slow, spreading smile that did not belong on the face of a 17-year-old girl. "You think this is the end?" The voice crooned, "No, this is merely a pause, a negotiation." Her fingers curled against the floor. She is mine. She asked for me. She wanted more. She wanted a shortcut. And I, the voice deepened, delivered. Father Erasmus's face hardened. She was a child, he said, a lonely girl who didn't understand what she was asking. Sister Maria stared at Clara, tears gathering in her eyes. We love you, Clara, she whispered, and you are stronger than anything trying to destroy you. You are still here. I know you are still here. A sound like a soft, dark laugh rose from Clara's throat. Love, the voice repeated, dripping with contempt. That word again. As though it means anything to her anymore. But Sister Maria continued, ignoring the voice. Clara, focus on my voice. Remember the chapel at dawn. Remember how you used to sing when you thought no one was listening. You wanted to be a teacher. You used to tell the younger girls stories at night, so they wouldn't be afraid. Clara, that is who you are. A tremor went through Clara's shoulders. For the first time, her lips trembled, not with a smile, but with something fragile, something human. No, the voice snapped abruptly. Do not listen. Another shudder rocked her body. Her chest rose sharply, like she was drowning and fighting for air. Father Erasmus stepped forward, holding his crucifix firmly before her. Clara Germana, seal, he said with authority that filled the room like a sudden gust of wind. Today you will reclaim your soul. Clara's body jerked violently. Her fingernails scraped the floor. The temperature in the room dropped so quickly Sister Maria's breath fogged in the air. A low hum pulsed through the walls, building into a strange, grating frequency. The voice inside Clara hissed, "You are too late." But Clara, not the voice, not the entity, lifted her head slowly and whispered in her own voice, "Help me." Those two words, thin, desperate, barely audible, became the spark the room needed. Father Erasmus began the rite. The entity fought. The walls shook. Clara screamed, a layered, bone-chilling scream that rose and rose until it seemed the windows would shatter from the sheer pressure of it. Sister Maria covered her ears, tears streaming silently as she watched the girl she loved as a sister convulse violently on the cold floor. The light bulb overhead flickered, the air thickened, and then Clara's body lifted off the ground, just inches at first, then higher, her back arched unnaturally, her hair dangling toward the floor as though pulled by invisible fingers. Her limbs twisted at angles no human body should ever bend, yet she did not cry out. She only stared forward with lifeless eyes as something inside her clawed, raged, fought to keep its hold. Sister Maria crawled forward on her knees, reaching toward Clara's dangling hand. "Stay with us," she sobbed. "Clara, stay with us. Don't let it take you." Clara's head snapped toward her, too fast, too sharp, and the voice spat, "She isn't yours to save." But the real Clara fought back. Torn between two forces, her voice strained through clenched teeth. "Maria, don't leave me." Sister Maria clasped her hand, despite the electric sting of cold shooting through her fingers. "Never," she whispered. "I will never leave you." Thunder rolled outside, though not a single cloud darkened the sky. The room seemed to breathe. Father Erasmus continued reciting, his voice loud enough to drown out the entity's taunts. "In the name of Christ, I command, no." Clara's body crashed to the floor, the impact shaking dust from the rafters above. But before Sister Maria could reach her, Clara pushed herself upright, though her movements were jagged and unnatural. Her eyes, both sets, locked onto Father Erasmus. "He cannot save her." The voice seethed. Father Erasmus stepped closer. "I am not here to save her," he said steadily. "I am here to remind her that she is already saved." The entity shrieked, a sound no human throat should have been able to produce. Clara doubled over, clutching her head, sobbing, choking, begging, screaming in two voices at once. Sister Maria covered her mouth, her heart breaking. Clara had always been soft, spoken, gentle, a girl who prayed quietly in shadows and apologized too often for things that weren't her fault. And now she fought a war no one should ever have had to fight. The floor beneath her darkened with sweat, tears, and the tremors of the unseen. Father Erasmus raised his crucifix higher. Clara screamed. The lights blew out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. The only illumination came from the faint, flickering glow of the sunrise outside the window. Dim, fragile, but present. The entity hit at the light. Clara's hand shot forward, reaching for the window as though instinctively compelled by something deep within her soul. but the darkness inside her resisted, jerking her back, slamming her against the wall. "Stop!" She screamed, not in the demonic voice but her own. Sister Maria lunged toward her. "Clara!" But Clara looked up, tears streaking her cheeks, and whispered, "Don't touch me. It's trying to hurt you." Sister Maria froze. Clara's knees buckled. The entity began to speak again, but the words were fractured now, damaged, its confidence wavering, its rhythm broken. The light leaking into the room made it recoil, hiss, and falter. Father Erasmus recognized the shift. He stepped forward. "Clara, look toward the light, not at me, not at Maria." The light. Clara forced herself to turn toward the weak morning glow. The entity screamed, her body convulsed, then something inside her cracked. A sound not physical, but spiritual, a tearing, a separation. The temperature surged from freezing to burning. Father Erasmus pressed the crucifix to Clara's forehead. The entity thrashed inside her, furious, desperate. Clara sobbed, "Please, let me go." And then silence. A single beam of sunlight struck Clara's face directly, illuminating her trembling features. Her eyes, slowly, painfully, changed. No longer black, no longer glassy, but soft, brown, human, her own. The entity shrieked one last time. A fading, echoing cry ripped from her chest before the room exhaled, as if a suffocating weight had been lifted. Clara collapsed unconscious into Sister Maria's arms. The air cleared. The tremors stopped. The darkness receded. It was over. For several long seconds, no one moved. Sister Maria cradled Clara, rocking her gently, whispering prayers through her tears. Father Erasmus knelt beside them, his hands shaking as he removed his glasses and covered his face. Outside, the sun finally rose fully, flooding the convent hallways with soft gold. Hours passed before Clara opened her eyes. She blinked slowly, dazed, fragile, like someone waking from a long and unforgiving nightmare. Sister Maria leaned close. "Clara, do you know me?" Clara lifted a trembling hand to her face, touched her cheek, touched the floor, touched Maria's wrist. Then, very quietly, she whispered, "I'm free." Tears filled Maria's eyes again as she pulled Clara close. Father Erasmus stood in the doorway, watching with a look of profound relief and exhaustion. He had seen many battles of spirit and soul in his life, but none had shaken him like Clara's. Later that evening, Clara sat in courtyard beneath a simple tree, the evening breeze brushing through her hair. She looked thinner, weaker, but alive, truly alive. Birds hopped in the grass beside her, unafraid. Sister Maria sat beside her, silent for a long time before asking softly, "Clara, what do you remember?" Clara closed her eyes. "Enough," she said quietly. "Enough to know I never want to feel that darkness again, and enough to know that if you hadn't stayed, I wouldn't be here." Sister Maria squeezed her hand. "You were the one who fought. We only stood beside you." Clara shook her head. "No, I fought because you believed I could." A tear slid down her cheek, but she smiled, small, fragile, but real. Father Erasmus approached them slowly. "Clara," he said, "you have endured what many never would survive. But I need you to know something important." She looked up. He continued, voice steady but gentle. "The darkness inside you was powerful, but it feared something more powerful than itself." He gestured toward the sunlight. "It feared what it could never take, your light." Clara looked toward the horizon. For the first time in months, it did not hurt her to do so. She breathed in deeply, letting the warm glow settle over her skin. And she whispered, "It's mine again." That night, the convent was quiet, peaceful. Birds slept in their nests. The wind rustled softly through the trees. And in her small room, Clara finally rested without nightmares, without whispers, without shadow. The darkness had tried to claim her, but it had failed, because the one thing it could never extinguish, the one thing it could never take was her light.